Yep, we can see it.
All right, cool. All right, good morning slash afternoon, depending on where you live. We are here to talk to you about what to do now that emerald ash borer is in your area. And I know that we've got a lot of folks from across the country joining us. So for those of you who are familiar with this, there may be a little bit of repeat information, but we'll try to reduce the redundancy. And for those of you who are in sort of the emerging or newly emerged EAB markets, this hopefully will be a good refresh and learning opportunity for you. Before we get started, an opportunity to just have a quick safety brief. For those of you who are in your offices or your homes, please check your surroundings for any trip hazards. If you are in an area where there's going to be inclement weather, please know where your safe zones are, depending on what those inclement weather issues are where you live. And I've already seen a couple come through the chat. If you are in your vehicle, just be on listening mode, or please be parked in a safe location. Do not try to type anything or talk or do anything like that if you're in your vehicle. So for those of you who signed up using our link, you should have put your name and your ISA certification number in during registration. And if that is the case, you do not need to do anything right now. So you already did that. Please do not type anything in. We've got you. But for those of you who are either sharing a computer or did not put your CEU ISA information for CEUs, please type into the Q&A box your name and your ISA number. And if you're not sure if you did, type it in there so we make sure. The webinar is being recorded. It is worth one ISA CEU. And then also continue to ask questions using the Q&A box during the session, and we'll answer those at the end. I'm Allison Harrell. I am an arborologist and the Pacific Northwest Territory Manager based out of Portland, Oregon. I am co-presenting with Hannah Hampton, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But our jobs are to train and educate all of y'all on plant healthcare protocols and give you technical support, product, and equipment training with a myriad of other tasks as well. I come to you with 13 plus years of experience in the tree care industry, doing everything from climbing to plant healthcare to research, education, training, and sales, and have studied environmental science and biology and urban forestry as well in a more traditional way. Hannah Hampton also comes from a very similar background, has a degree in forestry, has also come up through the ranks as far as climbing, plant healthcare applications, training, and sales. And she is the technical advisor based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Her work, many of you probably know her, has been focused a lot around helping municipalities build their management plans. So she'll be talking about some of that too. So for those of you, hopefully you do know Rainbow, but what have we got to offer you? We are plant healthcare, research and supply, education, and development of new products. We take on average 1,200 technical call supports per year, and those are only the ones that are reported. We have over 150 research trials annually, and we have 8 core values, which we hope permeate through your experience with us. Some of those being our science-backed protocols, our honesty and integrity, and our accountability with you. So thank you all for being here with us and working with us. Like I mentioned, we really do a lot of technical support, training, and e-learning, similar to what's going on in here today. So thanks for being here. Going to talk about the little green menace. Rainbow Ecoscience has been involved in every iteration of emerald ash borer since it first arrived in the United States in the very late 90s or early 2000s. Has been a big partner through planning for emerald ash borer in the very early days with the first EAB symposium. And we've been partnering with many, many different educational institutions and research institutions to find predictable results for treatment of this pest. Now it seems like that was so far away behind us because we actually have such efficacious products available to us, which we will discuss. But you all hopefully are familiar with Mectinite, which is our amamectin benzoate product that we will chat about, and some of our injection equipment. So getting into the meat of the presentation, what do we do now that emerald ash borer is in your area? Our basic agenda is going to be high-level overview of the pest. Hopefully this is just a review, the impact and why it matters, some of the lessons learned, and then getting into our management options. So just a quick overview. First and foremost, please know how to identify your ash, your Fraxinus species specifically. Recognize that this is general, but it has those compound leaves with 5 to 11 leaflets. It has opposite branching and sort of diamond-shaped bark ridges in many of the Fraxinus trees. The overview for EAB is that this is an agrylus insect, so Agrylus planopennis. It's a flat-headed borer. It's this metallic emerald green beetle. It's pretty small, only about 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch long. And I'll show you the life cycle, but it does revolve around the ash trees. And it will kill all Fraxinus, all ash, regardless of their health. So any myths that you've seen out there, it's going after all of them. As far as identification, I'm out here in Oregon, so I just put this up, but all of your states should have something like this, an EAB lookalike guide. I just think it's nice. There's a lot of different little green insects out there. But then this picture on the right, this is my fingernail. So if you notice, that's like a pretty small insect. I think we often just think it's a lot bigger, but it is quite small. This is what the life cycle looks like. Please note, the phenological indicator of the adult emergence is around 450 days, is the flowering of black locusts. Can be a little bit variable, but mid-May-ish is kind of that emergence. Then they lay their eggs, then their larvae will develop throughout the late summer. And that's the stage that's going to damage the tree a lot as it feeds on the vascular tissue. Then it will overwinter in the winter, so late fall into the spring, and then we'll pupate and start all over again. It is the most destructive invasive pest in US history. This is the most recent map that's been pulled, and I apologize, I did not make this map. It's a little bit difficult to see the blue in contrast to areas, but as we know, it started in Ohio and Michigan areas in the Midwest, Great Lakes area, and then has just expanded over the last 20 years. Most recently, the furthest it made it is out in my neck of the woods out in Oregon. So maybe there are folks here that are joining from there. Before that was Denver, and that was about 6-ish years ago. Denver area, not Denver proper, Colorado. And it has then expanded in that metro area over the last 5 years or so. So as you can see, it's made its way across pretty quickly when all things are considered. Like I said, it was discovered in the Great Lakes, spread across the country in about 20 years, and to date has killed over 100 million trees. So the spread of this has been very problematic. Obviously, we've seen it go thousands of miles in one go, and the insect can only fly a couple of miles by itself. So someone is taking it along for a ride, and I hate to break it to everyone here, but it's us. So please comply with the Don't Move Firewood campaign. Buy it where you burn it. Try not to transport these woods, and make sure that you're following your quarantine processes wherever you live. Some signs and symptoms to look for: those D-shaped exit holes. Because they have that flat head, they emerge and make that little D-shaped exit holes. And again, they're pretty small, only about 1/8 of an inch. They have those serpentine feeding tunnels, and they will leave frass behind in them. One really big early telltale is woodpecker flecking. Woodpeckers love to eat the larva. So that flecking is typically seen before you could even detect EAB. And then those vertical bark splits, that bottom right corner, really common, because as you can imagine, as those larvae start to feed, it dries out that space, and then the bark cracks away from it and then starts to reveal those galleries. And then as you get into the later stages, you'll see thinning of the canopy and epicormic shoots, which is pretty common as far as pretty much any stressor in trees. So you're going to see this a lot as you learn more about EAB. If you're in one of the emerging areas, and if you are already have lived this, you may be able to detect where you are on this curve. But as we know, have learned over a couple decades, the first few years takes a really a little bit of time to detect that EAB is there. But once it's there, it starts to build up very quickly. You get low pressure and symptoms are slow to show up, but high pressure yields rapid death and it happens very fast. And this is why EAB has really quick population growth, really high survivability. So if we have one emerald ash borer female that lays 80 eggs, if we look at that exponential growth, 80 eggs in 5 years will create a lot of EAB. So if you want to think of a number in your brain, what you think this might be, and play a self-guessing game, 1 year, 80 eggs will yield 3,200 eggs in the second year. In the third year, we're looking at 128,000. By year 4, over 5 million. And by year 5, 205 million. And I think that's the biggest thing. One EAB is not really going to be an issue, but when you're talking about fighting off hundreds of millions of insects, you are going to get rapid tree death. So the practical concerns and impacts of this, I have lots and lots of pictures, but I think that this is the one that sticks with the most folks. Areas that have had infestation, and I'll preface this by saying almost every city in the Midwest or in an area that has gotten EAB has pictures that look just like this, where all of their ash were fine. EAB was detected and it was okay. So in this circumstance, EAB was discovered in 2006. Your photo on the left is 3 years after it was detected, 2009. Everything still looked fine. And then 2 years later, 2011, all of those trees are dead. So that's that exponential curve in real life. There's also a lot of other concerns. The economic concerns, of course, trees are expensive to remove and replace, as we know, but they also serve us a lot of benefits, both economically as well as from ecosystem services. We're not going to talk about tree benefits, but hopefully we are all arborists here that know the importance of trees and are working actively to take in tree preservation lens into our work. The public health component of things, obviously, our urban heat islands. And then as related to that is kind of below that, which is canopy cover considerations. A lot of us live in cities that are actively trying to increase their canopy cover. So if we lose a lot of trees, it's going to be really hard to keep those in balance with one another. And then in most recent years, we've actually taken an opportunity to recognize that issues like this can disproportionately impact certain communities. And the beautiful thing about emerald ash borer, it stinks, but we have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes. So I just bring those up as a laundry list of many impacts. So our management options. We have come a long way when it comes to management options. First, I'm going to show you the canopy thinning index. This is just something for us to consider depending on where we're at in the curve of things. And what we've got as far as options available to us. Typically at the 25-ish% thinning canopy is where we would recommend stopping treatments and looking at removal and replacements. And at 40 to 50%, this is where things become unsafe for climbers to access. So for those of us who are working in the field, this is a huge thing to consider. Also, when we're looking at bidding out work, removing a tree that has a lower infestation is going to be more doable. But once we get to the point where trees are actually starting to die, it becomes a whole nother issue. Anybody who's climbed an ash, even a healthy one, knows that they're kind of brittle in their tendencies. So imagine them drying out. You've just got really unsafe conditions, and that will kind of change the scope of your work. So being proactive is crucial. So once again, we see this little curve that we're looking at. These are where your treatment options come into play. So at the early years, you have lots of options available to you, but as you start to get into those trees starting to die off, that's where your options sort of start to run out, which is on the left, you've got lots of different management strategies, which Hannah's going to talk to you about. And on the right is when your strategy is just removing hazardous trees. So Hannah will go into this a little bit more, but as you think about what trees you've got out there, really be looking at what makes sense to protect. The goal is not to treat and preserve every single ash tree. We actually want to be looking at larger canopy diversity goals and things like that. So looking at mature trees that are delivering the most benefits, trees that are of historical value or in prominent locations, trees where removal would be an absolute nightmare. Again, looking at urban canopy initiatives, and then looking at staging things for removals and replanting. The general rule of thumb is that you should start treatments when you are about 15 miles from the closest EAB infestation. The one thing to consider there is folks that are in that 15 to maybe 30-mile range would be the sort of like lower risk outlier trees. You may still consider putting plans into action because obviously, as we saw, humans tend to move things around really quickly. And regardless of where you are, 30 miles and beyond, everybody needs to be starting to plan if this is something that has not hit your area, because we've seen it happen a lot, and Hannah's going to share some of that too. But if y'all don't have inventories and plans together, this is going to hit you. And you saw that curve, things happen fast. You're going to be left with a pretty dire situation. So I'm just highlighting this here. There are a few different treatment options. There's a couple of different systemic soil applications. Those are mostly used in that range where things are a little bit further. There's one downside, which is that both imidacloprid and dinotefuran, so our Zytec and Transtec products, are neonicotinoids. So depending on where you live, that may or may not be an option. But those are 1-year treatments, and they're pretty cheap. So that's a pro of those. Please note that the timing is really important. Imidacloprid takes a while to get into the tree. Dinotefuran, not as much. So you just want to make sure that you're timing to get the most insecticide in the tree at that time. Emamectin benzoate, mectinite, has really been the sort of gold standard for use over the last decade. It has 2 full years, if not more, efficacy against emerald ash borer, and you've got a little bit of a wider windows when it comes to treatment options. You want the peak amounts of insecticide in the xylem of the tree when the eggs hatch and larvae start to feed, which again is kind of that like summertime situation. Okay, so the good news is we've learned about emamectin benzoate, mectinite being injectable as a microinjection, and it's extremely efficacious. Also, from a safety perspective, it allows us to reduce our exposures as applicators. It is honestly the best way, and sometimes the only way, in high pressure areas. And again, it is the non-neonic option, which is great as we are more concerned about our pollinators. So that's, like I said, we do have 99+% efficacy if we treat in time, which is prior to canopy thinning. And please reach out to us if you have questions for rates, but I just put the labeled rates, which is 2.2 mils to 15.3 mils, but generally we are recommending somewhere in the 5 to 10 mil range, depending on the infestation and size of the tree. Please reach out if you have questions on this. So, also, when it comes to tree injection, we have come a long way. We have put together a best management practice in arboriculture with ISA. So actually, Sean Bernick, who works for Rainbow, along with the well-renowned Dr. Smiley were the ones to co-author this piece, and it has been reviewed by 39 industry experts across lots and lots of different agencies and entities. So it is a comprehensive view of how we are looking at tree injection to best, be the safest and the most efficacious. We've gotten a ton of improvement in efficacy. We've improved the formulation of emamectin benzoate, so it is safer for our communities, our applicators, and the environment. It's also much faster when it comes to uptake time, and we've gotten to reduce the cost on it as time has gone on. One last thing I will leave you with is that we have really improved the injection technology to minimize tree damage, because we have found that this has become a huge problem. As seen here, some of the older technologies for tree injection, we've seen a lot of damage. We'll talk about that in just a second. There are best management practices to remedy that, but we've also found there's less user error with some of the more recent developments. Injection location is crucial. We need to be looking at the flares of the tree. It has more sapwood, faster uptake, it will compartmentalize faster, and will have better distribution into the canopy. I'm going to make one note that this is in the BMP, that there is a discussion around plugs. Most systems these days do not require them. However, we understand that there are personal preferences out there. But if you choose to use those types of systems, They must be set extremely precisely, and proper training is crucial. So hopefully you all are working with us and have our systems, because we, that Keep Connect at the bottom, are responsible for making sure that you are trained. But if you do have another system, call the manufacturer and make sure that you are getting a hands-on training from said manufacturer, because that is what the going recommendation is. And my last note is just talking about the residential arborist perspective, because Hannah's going to take a little bit wider lens and looking kind of bigger picture. But residential arborists or commercial, smaller scale properties, start notifying your clients of the risk of having ash on your properties. If you have any software that can pull where you have ash, that can be really helpful as far as targeting your reach outs. Do not start treatments until the confirmation of the pest in a reasonably close zone to you. We don't need to be panicking about things. Once you do have confirmation of the pest, your options really are only going to be to treat or remove. Doing nothing is the most expensive and the worst result. You will potentially end up with lawsuit issues on your hands, because if you let a tree die and become hazardous and then it falls and injures someone, that can be a problem. Please work to train your climbers on signs, symptoms, and sampling. Like I already kind of mentioned with the previous point, removals can become much more dangerous once they're infested. So make sure that your bids reflect that accordingly. And then please consider the overall health of the tree and the value that it has to those homeowners as you're putting your ideas together and your plans together. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Hannah.
All right, I'm going to share my screen once you're done sharing it, Allison.
Thank you.
All right, can you see it?
Not yet.
All right, let me know when you can.
Okay, hang on. Did you share the correct screen? There, oh, there it goes. Okay, just slow. I got it.
All right. Okay, so thank you for all of that, Allison. Like Allison mentioned, my name is Hannah Hampton. Today, I am mostly going to be covering more wide-scale treatment options. So I am going to use municipality a lot. This can also be used interchangeably for anyone that is managing larger areas, but that's mostly what I'm going to be focusing on this part of my presentation. So talking about if you're sitting in a location where maybe emerald ash borer has just popped up, or you're somewhere that you're just starting to prepare and make plans for it, some of the big things to note, having some issues there. There we go. Some big things to note is to start with the very basics, right? So in order to even start developing a plan at all, you need to make sure that you have an inventory in place. This is one of the most important tools that's going to be able to carry you through years and years and years of management of this, right? So make sure, of course, you know how to identify ash. Allison mentioned that. Record the number of ash you have in your municipalities on larger properties, things like that, so you know the severity of what you'll be dealing with. Their diameter, of course, so you can know how big some of these trees are and the impact of removing or treating them. A lot of software will come with those drop-down menus. Make sure you're utilizing those for as much data input as you possibly can. The other thing to note too is a lot of them have map or GIS technology in them, which is fantastic, but you may also want to utilize some sort of tree tag, especially if it's coming to treatments, because a lot of times what happens on the GIS is they get really close clumped together, but you want to make sure you're working on the correct tree and you have the correct information for that tree as well. The other thing inventory is going to be extremely useful for is you can actually start culling out your ash populations now. So if you're in an area where, it's 500 miles away from you is the closest confirmation, but you have a really large ash canopy cover, it's really wise to start looking at your inventories and considering which trees would be good for removal. So for example, if you have a few ash trees that have been severely pruned under power lines for years and years and years, or blocking maybe an intersection where you have to really prune those hard back, or generally just declining, it may be worth it just to remove those now and start as your first grab of reducing some of your ash populations. So the thought of this is going through your inventory, making sure again you have a drop-down menu to note any wounding or anything that refers to the condition of the tree, so then you can easily pull that information, start culling out those populations immediately. And one thing to note, which I wish this would go without saying, but if you're going to invest in having an inventory, make sure you're keeping it up to date so that way you can reevaluate any management plans moving forward, again, very easily. Now, when we're considering what trees to protect from emerald ash borer, of course, Allison touched on this briefly, but what I want to talk about is more of a wide scale management approach. So again, this is more thinking from a municipal side of things. Of course, we want to focus on mature trees because they give us the most benefits. They give us the most monetary benefits, environmental benefits, and social benefits, right? So it's probably worth it to save more mature trees than just cut them all down and plant new ones or not replant, right? So, for example, another area we'd want to consider is places that already have low canopy cover. So, in this example on the screen, as you can see, this is a screenshot from two different Portland, Oregon neighborhoods, one having a lot of canopy cover and one having very little canopy cover, right? So, if we're thinking about where we're going to prioritize treating ash trees, and I'm talking the mature ash trees in good condition, we probably want to look at places that already have low canopy cover. They're going to feel the impacts a lot more than the neighborhood that has a high canopy cover of different species, right? So we want to definitely consider that when we're thinking about what areas of a city or larger land management areas that are going to feel the impact more of trees dying all at once or removals. Again, historical value and prominent locations. Allison touched on this, but wide scale, that could look like I've seen many cities or large properties that have entire rows leading up to a courthouse or a town hall or a really big mansion or something like that, that if you were to let some of those trees die or even have to remove some of them and intermix planting, it just won't be giving the same aesthetic appeal. So in those situations, treatment is probably the best option. And again, staging things for removal, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a couple slides, but this is a really good tool that we can utilize to start diversifying some of our age classes and then just reduce this pressure of losing a large swath of our canopies all at once. So what does the staging for removals look like? So first we have, this is just three options. There's many options and ways to go about this, but option one, what that would look like all at once, of course, we have our trees all about the same age. They're all ash, we're removing them, we're immediately replanting. Again, all the same age, they're gonna grow the same, all of that good stuff. Option two, we're going to mix in some plantings with keeping our mature trees. And then we're going to, once those new plantings reach a certain age, we're actually going to remove those mature trees. Maybe we keep them on a treatment cycle for a couple years just to give those newly planted trees a little bit of time to mature and give us some of those benefits. And then another option we could look at is doing the underplanting again, doing some treatments in there, and then staggering the removals even more than you did before. So that's still leaving some mature trees, letting those underdeveloped canopies come up, and then staging out the removal. So we're just not losing large portions of mature tree canopy all at once. So again, a lot of times when we give these presentations, I show a lot of photos like Allison did of the Fort Wayne, Indiana example. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and a lot of times and kind of, I have to have a lot of spooky photos to show everyone. But one thing I do like to touch on is that this is also a really good silver lining, and it's a chance for us to learn from a lot of our mistakes from the past, right? So we can take what we didn't learn from the Dutch elm disease outbreak, and now we're sitting here with green ash and other ash species in municipalities, and we could actually take this and make a big impact across a lot of different fields. So it's really important that while we're considering removing some of these populations, we're also considering what's going in their spaces, right? So we have a really good opportunity to improve our species diversity, which overall will help our urban forests be more resilient in the long run, especially when it comes to invasive pests and diseases, and then any other abiotic issues that may pop up as well. Again, I can't touch enough about how important age class diversity is as well, because beyond pest and disease issues, if you have a very even age stand of trees in an urban environment, you may start seeing all of them to decline in the same couple years of each other just due to age from natural causes, right? So while we have the chance to impact both of these factors, it's really important we're making good informed decisions in all of this. And again, treat, remove, and replant in waves to avoid mass canopy loss. So all of this that we talk about, it's all about reducing the impact and just not having all of our trees die at once, which becomes extremely overwhelming from an impact of our citizens, of us as arborists, and then also budgetary constraints, safety, what we can actually get done in a year even of removals. I know a lot of times municipalities, what they struggle with something like this is, you don't have the most staff in the whole world and you don't have all of the funding you could ask for, and it's hard to even keep up with a storm event. But then you go ahead and add 20% of your canopy on top of that, all dying within a couple years of each other, and that becomes extremely overloaded very fast. So when we're thinking about planning for a lot of this, we really just want to try to lessen the impact of all of that happening at once. So speaking of budgets, whether you are sitting in a place where it has not been confirmed yet, or you're out in the Portland metro area and you're just starting to get your plans together, or you're nearby an infestation, it is important to talk about budgets and how you can implement those. So when you're talking about chemistry, the cost is roughly going to be between 25 cents to $5 per diameter inch. Of course, that's going to vary greatly on what treatment method you're using, and also to consider that some of those treatment methods last for a year and some of those last for 2 years. So regardless if you're at the point where you're ready to treat, you need to start working in some built-in ash removals, right? Or some sort of plan in place to get funding for emerald ash borer management. And of course, again, when you're thinking about choosing your chemistries, make sure you're working those into your budgets and having the rates spec'd into whatever treatment options you're going to be having. And then you have two options from a municipality or a larger scale management option where you can either treat in-house or you can contract those treatments out. If you are going to be contracting those treatments out, please leave some room for any markup for labor and equipment. It is going to cost a little bit more if you're going to contract those out. In a situation that you'd want to do that is if you don't have enough staff on board, and it's just a little bit easier to handle going that route. But if you do have enough staff that are ready and willing to learn and are capable and have the licensing to do it, that also is a really good option to look into doing it in-house. The other thing to note on this is you don't have to do all of your treatments all at once, right? So if you have 500 trees, it's not recommended even necessarily to treat all 500 at once. If you can, that would be fantastic. But you could do 250 one year, come back the next year, treat 250. So that way every year you have treatments going on, but it's not a large budgetary constraint every single or every other year. So there's a lot of conversations out there about the general cost of emerald ash borer, right? So basically, at the end of the day, we all know that there is going to be cost associated with this invasive pest. There is no option out there that won't end up costing us something, right? So this is a study that Dr. Rich Howard did on cost benefit of emerald ash borer. So these numbers, you can look at them if you want. I'm not going to go into detail about them. It's just an example from his study. But basically, the three options that we have here are do nothing, which does end up being the most costly because you have this massive tree die-off all at once. So it's going to cost a little bit more to contract anything out. Removals become more expensive, and you just have a big overwhelm and influx of things happening all at once. The one caveat to this is the contrast between doing nothing but preemptively removing all your ash trees. So doing nothing is the most costly. However, if you wait, technically you do get those benefits of having mature trees last, but you do see the impact a lot more severe. But preemptively removing all your ash trees, you're losing all those benefits, right? Before the insect is even necessarily established in a location or has a chance to really take hold and start to see massive tree dieback. So removing all your ash trees can also be expensive in that way as well. The third option would be to treat your ash trees, which is going to be the least expensive and you have the most benefits. Now, I want to highlight that none of these should be used as singular options for everything. In fact, it would be best to probably use a mix of them, right? So you could, if you're a smaller municipality that has very little ash trees, you could certainly consider, maybe if you have 50 ash trees, maybe it is just best for you to go in and remove all those trees. But if you're a municipality that has 20 to 30% ash cover, that's likely not the best option. And a lot of times the mix and match option is going to be the most cost effective and reduce the amount of stress on your operations. So you can also treat trees for just 2 or 3 treatment cycles to give you time to catch up to all the removals that you need to do. You don't have to treat trees for their entire life. In fact, I would just prioritize the best of the best in those prominent locations, things like that, and then slowly over time decrease your ash populations. And another thing to note about this study that Dr. Howard did is he found that treatment for 20 years generally costs the initial cost of removal. So you can keep a tree around for 20 years, treating it, have all the great benefits of having that tree, and then it'll start to finally catch up with the initial cost of removal itself. And I just wanted to highlight, this is an example of a cost benefit analysis. This is something that we put together for the city of Portland. So this takes their ash tree inventory data and calculates it all in here. Again, this is blurry. The numbers don't necessarily matter in this instance, but you can look at how much it would cost you to do treatments in-house versus contracting them out. And then this red line is the cost of removals. So again, the thing to highlight here is this red curve that we see versus this green curve. So it's a lot easier generally to get budget for $1 million worth of tree work than it is for $5 million worth of tree work, right? And in the end, we get all these benefits like I just discussed. So it's important that while you're putting together some of these budgets and trying to figure out what the overall cost of your options are going to be, you have something like this in place. So now I'm just going to discuss a couple of practical lessons learned. So these are just going to be a few case studies from the Midwest. These are all very near and dear to both me and Allison. So I'm going to be talking about Chicago, the city of Des Moines, Iowa, and then Shoreview, Minnesota. So I'm going to talk about how they implemented some treatment options and removals and things like that. So first, I'm going to start with Chicago. So emerald ash borer was identified there in 2008. So they had about 83,000 right-of-way trees. They did the thing where they went in and took out the worst of the worst, things that they deemed not worth saving necessarily in the wake of this pest. And then they put the rest of them on a 3-year treatment cycle. The city funded all of these treatments. One thing to note about a 3-year treatment cycle as well is this is a strategy that a lot of municipalities will use. The caveat here is that tree injection and emamectin benzoate is only labeled for 2 years of treatment. So if you are on a 3-year treatment cycle, you may just have to tolerate some tree dieback or some loss with that. But that is built into their plan of the 3-year treatment cycle. So what they did is they put as much information out to the public as they could about what was going on with their ash trees. And then as the public called in, they prioritized the people who called in to get out to do treatments first, which worked fairly well. And they were able to accomplish quite a few treatments. However, of course, there's people that are just going to miss the notifications, aren't really paying attention. I would hate to say people don't care, but sometimes it's just not top priority, right? So what happened in the wake of just having people call in and doing treatments, about 31,000 trees died. So sometimes we find that in locations specifically that are associated with lower income, those trees were the ones that were going first. Now, we also found that about 13,000 park trees had to be removed in the city because they just couldn't get there in time for it. And then a couple of those parks were actually completely clear cut, unfortunately, because they were mostly ash. So that's a huge impact on our social environment and also just thinking about the urban heat island and all these wonderful benefits that tree canopy cover give us. Again, we want to try to reduce doing clear cuts in most situations, right? The other thing to note as municipal managers or even large scale managers, again, if you're going to be having plans in place, it's really important to have fail safes in. So that way, if you were to leave or there were political changes or anything like that, treatment can go on. So what happened here is in 2020, there was a mayoral change and treatments did not continue. So they still had quite a few trees left, about 52,000. However, without treatments occurring, they did see some start to decline. Now they're kicking back up treatments this year, so everything should be good to go on their end. But this is just an example of how they handle it. Again, noting with emerald ash borer, we have 2 decades of research and hundreds of cities and areas that have dealt with this. So if you're just starting to implement a new plan or maybe reworking an existing, reach out to other municipalities who have lived through it. They can help you understand what worked for them, what they could have done different, what worked really well, things like that. It's really good to connect with other people in the industry. So I'm going to talk about the city of Des Moines now. This is my hometown, so I have lived this and experienced this. They began their preemptive removals in 2015, which I say in air quotes because 2015 was actually the same year that they discovered EAB. So they were very lucky that they had just started implementing a plan to manage this pest the same year that it was confirmed there. Today, if you go down to the city of Des Moines, one thing you will notice is they have appropriately managed all of their city trees. That is their property. However, a lot of private residents missed the mark on this. And at this point, about 8 years later, every tree that is not treated is standing dead and the bark is sloughing off. So visit Des Moines for many wonderful things, but you will also notice a lot of ash trees that are standing dead. So their plan was they had about 8,000 ash trees on the right of way. They selected about 2,000 to treat for 3 treatment cycles. So of course they did the staggering just to delay the overwhelm of removals that had to occur. And then they went the same route where they tried not to clear cut entire blocks or neighborhoods that had a high population of ash. So they tried to divvy that out so the impact wasn't felt as greatly in those areas. So moving forward, they have about 400 trees that they're going to treat indefinitely using the same model where they picked out any prominent trees. A lot of them are on a very important boulevard in their downtown. So people visiting and traveling through, that's a really important location for all of those ash trees. The other thing with all of this, too, for any municipal managers out there, it's really important to get the word out to the public about what you're going to be doing and trying to give them as many options as you can, depending on whatever model you're going to employ in your management strategy. So they wrap trees, like in this photo, giving all the information on if the tree was going to be removed, if the tree was going to be treated, the name of the tree company that was going to be performing it, and then contact information as well. Another thing that they did is they sent out notices in people's water bills. Of course, the theory being that everyone is probably going to open their water bill and pay it, but then they also get information on what their options are for their trees, right? And social media has been a really big presence and impact on notifying people on what's going on. The amount of times I've had people come up to me and be like, oh, well, my grandma's neighbor told me about this thing and it's this little green bug. So social media really has a huge impact on getting the word out to people, and especially from a city perspective to tell them what you're doing as well. So the last example I'm going to share is up here in Minnesota, city of Shoreview. So this is a municipality just outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So what they do is they hire 2 summer interns and then they purchase all their products and equipment in-house. They go at all of their publicly owned trees and treat them. And then whatever time they have left, they actually will work off of a list of residents that have called in for treatments. And then they are able to provide treatments to private residents and their private trees at just the cost of chemical, which is an extremely good deal for all of those private residents. And all they have to do, it's based on a first come, first serve model. So you just have to call them, get on the list, and then once they get off the public, they'll come out and treat your tree. So these are all options as well. A lot of people that I've heard in the Midwest are now working towards trying to figure out how to get to that private tree situation. How do we start to subsidize trees that are standing on private property or help with treatments on private property, things like that. So this is a really good thing to implement, or at least take parts of it as well. So with all of this, again, it's really important to get the word out as much as possible. So here are some examples of a couple different places who have had good outreach efforts. So we have a Facebook post from the city of Sioux City. They just confirmed that last year. Of course, Denver's Be a Smart Ash campaign. If you haven't seen anything about that, please put that into Google because it is an awesome campaign that they had. It has been very, very successful. And then these other examples are just getting the word out about exactly what your options are, why it's important to save your tree or at least consider it, things like that. So getting the word out as much as possible to the public is only going to benefit all of us as arborists, right? So with that, at the end of all of this, if whether or not you're sitting somewhere where you have already lived through emerald ash borer infestations and you're on the tail end of it, if you're somewhere where it just popped up, or you're somewhere where you're 500 miles away, the biggest takeaways here is we have 2 decades of research and lots of people to rely on to where our cities don't have to look like this, right? This doesn't have to be us moving forward. And overall, I hope that we could just learn from the past and make really good decisions. So that's all I have. Here is the ISA CU code. If you didn't add your CU number when you registered, please put your first and last name and number in the chat.
Thanks, Hannah. And then this is the code for your records. We will handle getting this submitted for you. So you can take a picture of the screen right now if you'd like. Also, will be taken care of for you. Cool. All right. Now we'll have time for some Q&A. So there's our contact information, both Hannah and myself. And then if you're in a broader area, our technical support email and phone number and chat are always available to you. All right. So first question coming in is, what diameter tree is too small to treat with mectonite and microinjection? You want to take that one or you want me to take it?
You got it.
Okay, so on our label, 4 inches is the smallest listed tree, but generally speaking, we typically recommend around 5 or 6 inches as the smallest that we treat. And also thinking about what Hannah kind of talked about, identifying what makes the most sense. A 4-inch tree or smaller may not really have the ecosystem benefits that's worthwhile for treating long-term. It may make more sense to just remove and replace that tree to get those same benefits back. Okay, we also had a question that said, where can I get the treatment options chart? And that was when you had the cost benefit sheet up, Hannah.
Oh, like the 3.
Yeah, do you have something like that that they can access, or would you have to send that to them directly?
I'd have to send it to someone individually.
Okay. All right, so Brandon, if you want to message one of us here, Hannah's info is right there, or you can email tech support and we'll get that to you. All right. In what cases do you think it would be appropriate to use a rate as high as 10 mils rather than what is thought of as more the standard for 5 mils? You want to take that one?
Yeah. So generally speaking, 5 mils is utilized in a lot of situations. Larger DBH trees, you could use a 10 mil rate, but 5 mils works pretty well for most situations.
Yeah, one thing to note here too is when we use that 10 mil rate, we will see phytotoxicity sometimes where the trees will blow off their leaves, which they do grow back, so it's not like it's long-term concern, but something to think about if your tree is already kind of stressed to lose that much photosynthesis may not be worth it, especially if we're seeing good efficacy at the lower rate. Also, the chemical's expensive, so to use that much, probably unnecessary in most circumstances. My only counter would be like, I don't know, if you just have a really large tree that you're worried about distribution and is really, really high value and you want absolutely no chances to lose it from EAB, that may be where that comes into play. How many years can you drill into the tree before the treatment process is causing more damage?
You can go first on that. I have an opinion on it too, but I'll let you go.
Well, so the nice thing about this that I kind of talked about but didn't really get into is ash trees are extremely good compartmentalizers, and especially if we've utilized newer technology that causes less bark splitting and things like that. The data out of the Morton Arboretum with Jake Miesbauer and Rich Hauer and a number of other folks has really shown that they can withstand treatment for decades without having much consideration for like decay pockets and compromised integrity of tree. That being said, it's possible that if you did a lot of damage because of misapplication, it would be sooner than that.
Yeah, I share the same opinion that, I mean, we've been treating trees for there's some that have been treated for almost 20 years at this point, and they're still standing and healthy and doing just fine.
And the
So
main
that's what I
thing
rely on for
is
that.
if you're in the root flare where there is good compartmentalization, it depends on where you live. This I will counter and say I've seen some stuff like up in the high desert where they get no really small amount of growth, have no rain, and it is harder for those trees to compartmentalize. But in most places, it usually within the 2 years, which is the BMP recommendation, they've compartmentalized well enough. Okay. Do you know what they're doing in Michigan now? I don't know the answer to this.
I don't know what the answer is either.
Okay.
I don't know how many trees are left in Michigan.
Me neither. If you want to shoot us a message on technical support, we could dig into that a little bit and reach out to our cooperators, but I actually don't know. Okay, do you know if any studies have been done to see how well isolated populations of ash have done? Is there a safe distance between populations where infestation is not likely as EAB cannot travel between populations?
Okay, I don't know of any studies, Allison, maybe you do, but I will say that no population, even isolated or not, is safe distance because of the human movement. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter that they don't fly very far. The reason why it's spread as far as it has is because of us.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact studies, but I was at a talk that Dr. John Ball gave a couple weeks ago, and he did mention something about isolated populations, but I think it was more that people thought that they were, quote, safe or had some sort of immunity, but the end answer was they actually didn't. It was just that they had weirdly been in a little pocket where the human movement and the flight had not found them yet. Not to say that there's not a possibility that that exists, but it seems low. Okay, I'll take this one. Any special treatment recommendations for wood for trees that are removed? And this depends heavily on where you live. Please be mindful that there are quarantines for movement of wood and things like that. But the general rule of thumb is chip to less than 1 inch so the beetles cannot complete their life cycle. Opportunity to solarize, so tarp solarize or kiln dry the wood. If you have to move it, debarking the trees if you have to move bigger pieces of wood, and then also like incineration or burying opportunities are out there. So please just make sure that you're following the rules for where you live. Okay, jumped on a few minutes late, so sorry if this was covered. Is there any evidence or research on long-term damage from repeatedly wounding trees through drilling and injection holes? Haven't seen any, but it's a question and concern. So we kind of just talked about that. And actually, that is the work that is being done out of the Morton Arboretum right now. And it is leaning us towards not really much concern for repeated wound, especially in Fraxinus and other ring forest trees. It could be different for other species of trees.
Yeah, and again, just to reinforce that doing proper application techniques will help prevent that.
Okay. Oh my gosh, so many questions. Okay. Does the Mectonite label have an application chart that includes DBH dosage and number of injection sites for the measured DBH? Yes. You go to rainbowecoscience.com, click Mectonite. The label is right there. It's available for you. The chart is there. Also, though, if you have one of our systems, we'll come train you. You measure the DBH and you divide that by 2 to get the number of injection sites, and then you put your dosage in based on the chart. Okay, this is a good one. Will we ever be safe to stop treatments?
Okay, so that depends a lot on the context. So individual trees specifically, if I was like a residential or commercial arborist, I would just keep treating those trees. From municipal perspectives, again, people can move to 3-year treatments, and sort of after that peak pest pressure wanes a little bit, you can start to space out treatment intervals. But again, if I'm talking to a homeowner and doing treatments for a homeowner and I'm responsible for an individual tree on a property, I'm going to keep doing 2-year treatments.
Yeah, also what I will add is most ash, especially our planted green, white, whatever, are like centurion trees. They don't live much past 100 years, 80 to 100 years. So that should give you a on that timeline, especially if they're already mature trees that are 50 or 60 years old. You have a definite timetable when you would actually just let the trees have natural senescence. Okay, yay, we have an answer from Michigan. Those that have trees in Michigan are still treating due to the naturalized areas getting new ash from seed banks. A significant part of my business is still there. So thank you to whoever put that
Yeah,
in.
thanks for
We
that.
don't have anyone in the trenches on this call from there. We've also got a comment. Good luck, everyone. We lost 99% of our large ash trees in Pennsylvania. So,
Well, we're learning from that, right? That's
yes,
the whole
exactly.
thing.
That's the point of this
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you for your sacrifices, but I hope
Uh,
everyone can learn from that.
yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to bring this up. Someone said, and this is what we were alluding to about the wounding. Dr. Howard, Dr. Ball, and Dr. North published data around wounding from multiple applications of incorrectly set arbor plugs, which is something to be considerate of. And we can give you the journal article for that if anyone wants to read that. I can stick that in the chat. Thank you for that. Yes, the wounding consideration is definitely real. So I'm just sticking that in the chat now. And then we've got time for like maybe 1 or 2. First of all, hi, Paul Smith. I know people can't see you, but I'm giving you a live shout out. Thanks for being here. Okay. What about injecting when you have a grafted root flare, for instance, on an autumn purple ash? Or do you go above or below the graft union?
I haven't really dealt with a lot of that, but I believe you'd want to go above it.
It depends. We did a little bit of sort of I don't know, self-research, not peer-reviewed, where we were just doing it ourselves. And we saw uptake in both places. I mean, you have to think about the physiology of the graft. It's obviously moving water and nutrients up. So why wouldn't it move up product as well? I think it's kind of case by case basis. And if anyone else has information they want to share on that, they're welcome to. But I think
That's
we've
also
done both.
probably, if you have questions about injection sites or things that come up too, snap a picture and send it to our technical line, and we can help advise you on where to do injections as well.
Okay, and our team, Joe, just chimed in and said he's had better luck with going above the graft. So thank you for that, Joe. All right. Oh my gosh. All right. We've only got time for like one more. Okay, what does non-restricted use mean? Okay, so that's our mectin product. Mectinite is non-restricted use. This depends on where you live, if this matters or not. In a lot of states, there's a different pesticide license that you need for restricted use versus non-restricted use. Generally, it has to do with the safety of the product. So look that up for your own state. Oh, if someone wants the link for Dr. Hauer's study for the cost benefit analysis, Hannah, if you have that, you want to stick that in the chat, if you can do that. Otherwise, James, please email our technical support and we'll get that to you. And
I
then the
don't have it
last
on hand.
question, thank you. The last question we'll tackle is emamectin benzoate, quote, safe for pollinators?
Allison, I know I'm going to let you handle this since you were directly working with Oregon Department of Agriculture on this conversation.
Yeah, so it depends what pollinators you're talking about. So when it comes to bees specifically, which obviously are probably our most studied pollinators, been very, very limited off-target concerns. There was a study done by the EPA that showed that whatever, I don't remember quite the exact science, but the molecule size was really not conducive for getting into the bodies of those bees. And even when they were directly in contact with it, it did not impact their flight pattern or anything like that. That being said, bees are not the only pollinators. There's definitely been a few concerns in my neck of the woods around things like butterflies that are caterpillars that are leaf feeders on ash. And emamectin benzoate does get into the leaves at a high enough concentration to kill those insects. So it's nothing, no insecticides are 100% safe. But what we're doing out here is we're just timing our applications accordingly with the insects that we know coexist with ash. The one other note that I will make as we collapse this talk is if ash are the thing that these insects feed on, and ash don't exist at all, those insects don't exist at all either. So whether you kill them with a pesticide or you kill them because there's no food source, that's you have to make your own ethical dilemma choices on things like that. And also, yes, ants are wind pollinated. So the likelihood of those pollen pollinators, if you will, is going to be very, very minimal. So there are considerations that are out there. Yay. Great questions. Thank you so much. Oh, all right. Eric has put in the chat. Okay. I just put into the chat those two different articles. One is on wounding and one is around economics. Everyone, thank you